my grandmother, who was in the hospital after having a heart attack. She passed, came back, and she saw my grandfather. And she says, "Why did you bring me back? I want to go back and be with Randolph. I want to be back with my husband." And she said it was so peaceful and so calm. And that is what I think about when I think of end of life, is that how can we bring that peace and calm now in our life so that we can extend it when we are at of life. So do we have peace and calm in our lives right now while we're alive and healthy? Like,
Yeah.
that's the $1,000 question. Do you have it? And if you don't, why not?
Welcome, everyone. This is my first podcast with a guest, and you know me well enough that I tend to just dive right in. So we're going to talk about death today. What better way to learn more about life than to talk about the end stage of life? So I have a special guest here with me today. Lynne-Anne McGrail has been an end-of-life doula since 2019 and a grief support specialist since 2020. She has been an American Sign Language interpreter since 1991. In 2013, she graduated with her MA in spiritual psychology from the University of Santa Monica and was certified as a life coach in 2014. It is my great honor to introduce a good friend, a great colleague, and someone who I love talking about and learning so much from, Lynne-Anne McGrail.
Hello, Ashley. It's great to be here, and I feel honored to be your first official guest on your podcast. And I've seen you grow and bloom in your business, and it's just such an honor to be here with you today, for sure.
Oh, likewise. So end-of-life doula, when most people hear that, when I say that to most people, they say, what? What? So what is an end-of-life doula?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, an end-of-life doula, I always try to explain it from a birthing doula's perspective, because most of us have heard of a birthing doula, somebody who's pregnant, who wants to have additional support while they're giving birth to their baby. And this is kind of the same thing on the other end of the spectrum. So now we're at end of life, and we're kind of, quote unquote, birthing out of this physical body and perhaps into the next. So as an end of life doula, I provide that non-medical, holistic approach to death. And what that means is that I'm there on a spiritual level, a mental level, a physical level, to support this person in their process of letting go of their physical being. Not only supporting them, but because they're typically, and most of the time, surrounded by family and friends, I'm supporting them as well. And part of becoming trained as a doula, one of the things that they make sure that you know how to do is understand what it means physically to start to leave this body and what happens to the body each time a person is at end of life. And it's different depending on what it is that they have. So, for example, if a person has pancreatic cancer and all of a sudden their belly is going to distend up and they're going to start to turn yellow, I have this information beforehand so I can share it with the families. And that way they know going in that it's not going to be a big surprise, even though it still is a surprise. It's more about educating and giving them a knowledge base, because knowledge is power, especially in this situation where you feel like you have no power, no control of the situation. So really being there for them. And I always call myself a being with person. I be with people. I be with the situation. I be with the family, exactly where they are. I don't go in there to try to fix anything, to make anybody feel any better. Basically just allowing them to be where they're at with all their fears, with all their questions, with all their concerns, and working side by side with hospice, which is the ideal situation. I can be the eyes and ears for them, allowing hospice to come in and do their job, and then I can stay after and be with them longer, which is one of the reasons why people like to use end-of-life doulas, because hospice can't stay there as long as they would like them to. And with good reason, because hospice is very busy and they have all their paperwork and they're very limited to what they can do. But they are an unbelievable organization. So I always try to disseminate that stigma around hospice where people are afraid to use them because then I'm going to die. Well,
Yeah.
guess what? You are dying. And do you want to die with grace and ease and peace of mind, or do you want to die struggling to try to stay alive in a situation where you're probably not able to? So, as an end of life doula, that's what I do. And then you mentioned as a grief support specialist. During COVID, so I started this business as an end of life doula. We actually have a company called A Better You, and we had a division of A Better You, which we created a place called A Peaceful Transition, which is where I do my services for end of life doula.
Okay.
And before COVID, I was going in and seeing people in their homes and meeting people in person. And then, of course, the pandemic hit and all of that changed.
Of
And
course.
someone who is not feeling well, especially at the end of life, the last thing they want to do is be on Zoom and try to figure out
Yeah.
a conversation. So I kind of shifted what I was doing from being bedside to supporting those in their grief process after the person has passed. And so went and got certified as a grief support specialist and now do a lot of my work. Probably 75% of my work is in the grief field as opposed to the end of life field. And I think because we just don't talk about death. That's why I love this podcast, because just as a society, we don't talk about it. It's like a big taboo. And if you talk about it, then that means it's going to happen. It's kind of
Yeah,
like
totally.
you talk about babies, that means you're going to get pregnant. It's like, no,
And
that's not going to be the case.
I feel like we spend so much time avoiding the topic of death that all of a sudden death is at our door and we haven't actually lived or, done a lot of the things that we felt we should have done. And
Just
that's why what better way to help people kind of think about their life than to think about the end? Because it's, there are two things certain in life, death and taxes, right?
exactly. Well, it's interesting. Doing this line of work, it has really truly taught me how to live, how to be fully present. They
Mhm.
have the regrets of the dying, and I think I even like printed out a list like the 5 things of that people regret the most. And the first one, which is, I wish I had the courage to live a life true to myself and not the life that others expected of me.
Mhm.
Going through life trying to people please and trying to be something other than you're not is a waste of time and energy, because life is way too short. We need to grab what feels good for us, not worry about what's going on for everybody else, but what makes me feel good, what brings me happiness. And that's the
Mhm.
ultimate, nirvana, is to be happy, right? Isn't that what we
Yeah.
want at the end of the day, with our relationships, with our jobs, with our, life, with whatever we're doing? We want to be happy. And another thing they say that they regret is, I wish I hadn't worked so hard. When I sit bedside with someone who was a software engineer for 45 years, was a workaholic, and missed his wife's their anniversary, or missed his kids' birthday parties because he thought that the most important thing was to be the breadwinner. And now
Mhm.
here he is at the end of his life going, oh my God, I did it wrong.
Yeah.
And at the moment we talked about it together, it gave him an opportunity to make it right. And so he chose to write letters to his children for after he passed. He wanted them to know how much he truly loved them. And it was just such a meaningful moment for me to realize, like, first of all, I work really hard. We all work really hard, but there has to be a balance in life. And one of the things that's the most important that I get from a lot of the people that I work with is that relationships are really the number one thing we want. We want to
Yeah.
know that we are loved and that we examinate love and that we are accepted exactly who we are. And so, and then another regret was, I wish I had let myself be happier. You know,
Mhm.
like, and that just goes right along with trying to people please with other people. And, really what makes me happy is
Yeah.
really the bottom line.
Doing the things in life that really meant something to you as opposed to, what society or the people around you thought was best for you. And
Hmm. Hmm.
um, that's something that I, as a coach, am seeing generationally. I think it's changing. I think that older generations were very much taught to your job is to make money and support your family. And however you do that, whatever makes you the most money, that's what you should be doing. And I think a lot of people that you're speaking to now at the end of life in those generations are, um, they're kind of having those realizations that, oh, I don't know if that's what it was supposed to be about. I don't know if my parents were right about that and instilling that in me. And fortunately, I think that the way we look at life is changing a little bit. I think that the younger generations are realizing that, like, my parents can tell me whatever they want, but I think that I've got to do what's right for me. And it's certainly causing some generational rifts and some complications in family dynamics and things like that, some disagreements for sure. But I think it is something that is changing, luckily. But
Great.
it's definitely still something that we still need to get out there and people still need to focus on because, it's all something we need to think about. It's coming for all of us, and how we spend our days are important, and how we also relax, and spending time to just cherish time with the people you love, and things like that, instead of like you said, blowing off the baseball game for that overtime or something. That, yep, sure, we all have to put food on our table, that is a reality in our world, but you know, love is the real fabric of the universe, in my opinion. So,
Yes. I too feel that there's a shift happening. I think there's more of an awareness now. I think because of the younger generation, where they're more like, let's just talk about hard facts. Like, are we really happy? And that generation that is going, wait, that 9 to 5 job, that didn't cut it. It's not cutting it.
yeah,
And so understanding that we have just quote unquote this one time to be in this physical body this time around on this earth, and how do we want to live its purpose, because we're all here, I believe, from my own spiritual background, that we are born with a spiritual curriculum that
hmm
we are here to fulfill. And whatever that looks like is different for every single person on this planet. None of us can know what the other person's spiritual curriculum is, so we best stay out of their business, but
yeah,
what their purpose is. I mean, that's just, it's true. I mean, we spend so much time trying to control other situations outside of ourselves when really we need to be just controlling this person right here.
controlling ourselves. Yeah, more and more people discovering that, and we're all on our own journey. That's something I try to reiterate to people. Everybody, you can want others to think differently or act differently sometimes, but you only really have control over you. And likewise for the other person, they have control over them. It's their curriculum, as you say. It's for them to sort out at the end of the day.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we truly don't have any control over our environment, but
Mhm.
we do have control how we respond to our environment. And it's especially true at end of life when you're working with someone who has literally exhausted all options for cures, all options for being on the planet a little bit longer. They are at end of life. And when you're confronted with that, wow, it's really, really deep. And it can bring up so much um, feelings, so many like different ways of looking at it, and looking back and trying not to have regret, and trying not to, if you will, open up the closet with all the skeletons in it. And one of the things I do as a doula is truly allow a person to get the skeletons out of the closet so they can have that peace of mind at end of life. I'll give you one story where this woman who was 83 years old, and she had colon cancer, and her son were estranged, and she was feeling really badly about that. And I said to her, I says, I'm happy to try to reach out to him and say, hey, your mom is at end of life and she would like to speak with you. And she said, that would be great if you could do that. So I did. And his response to me was, you have no idea what it was like growing up with her. She was evil. She was mean. She was not
hmm
considerate of my feelings and emotions growing up. She was very self-absorbed. And I said, I hear that. I hear all of that. I hear that anger. I also hear that she's at end of life and would like to see you to try to make amends. And he said, no. I'm not interested. So I went back and told her, I shared that with her, and she was sad. And she was also grateful that he had the opportunity to try to come forward. And
Hmm.
so, sure enough, like a week later, she passes away, and he calls me the next day and says that he's changed his mind. He would like to speak with her. And
Oh,
I said, I am so sorry, but she's passed. And so I use that example when I work with patients and clients that now is the time. Don't put off talking to anybody. If you don't have to be at end of life for this.
mhm.
If you have
Yeah.
a riff with somebody, if you have any skeletons in the closet, get them out. Get them out.
Yeah.
You know what the
In fact, you don't have to be at the end of life. This is the whole point of the conversation. So you
yeah,
do it now, not 50 years
exactly.
from now or whenever your time's coming, you know?
Exactly, because life
Yeah.
is precious and life is short, and we don't know when it's going to be our time. I mean, those people that were on that bridge in Baltimore did not know when they went to work that day that this
Certainly
was going to
not.
be their last day.
What a turn of events, you know?
You know, and it's true for a lot of people who die in that sudden way. You know,
Hmm.
sometimes it feels a little different if we're given a diagnosis and then that's the end comes slowly toward us. And people will often ask, what's harder to have a sudden death in a car accident or a long drawn out one that you know is coming? And I said, there is no harder or easier with either one of
Yeah.
these. They're both difficult. The one
Right.
that has a little bit longer time, like for my dad who had dementia, it gave me an opportunity to be more forthcoming to him, to share with him my thoughts and feelings while he was alive. So there is that benefit. But
Yeah.
I say, don't wait until that happens. Talk to
Don't put
people.
yourself in that position.
Right. Even if
Yeah.
if my dad died the next day in a car accident, I would want to know that I was still open and shared with him everything that I felt about him. So
Mhm.
not waiting for end of life to do these things is really key, which is
Mm.
the whole
Absolutely.
point of this. Yeah.
And going back to your story for a minute, it's one of those things where obviously this woman put off this conversation for so long because she knew what was going to be on the other end of that phone call was you have no idea what she was like and that, you know what I mean?
Mm,
But that person also realized that, oh my God, that's my mother at the end of the day. And, you know, what is it to me to try to make some kind of amends with her before she passes on, you know?
mhm.
Um,
Can we forgive? Can we let
yeah.
go of our
And
anger?
I think for the person who has to do the for the person who has to extend the olive branch, so to speak, in that situation, um, don't sell the other person short on their ability to kind of be bigger and kind of meet the occasion and be there with you. Yeah,
Exactly. You
it's an
know,
invitation for them to you know to receive what you have to give them, and if they don't receive it, and that's okay. Like I said, everybody's on their own journey, but if they do, then amazing. You know, you never know if those conversations happen 10 years earlier than the person's death, then
I know.
that's 10 years they could have gotten back in their relationship, so to speak. So these are the types of things that, you know, they're really unpleasant to think about in a sense, but nothing's more unpleasant than trying to have those conversations at the very, very end.
Exactly true. Exactly
Yeah.
true. Yeah.
Um, how did you, well, I guess I could say that Lynn-Anne and I used to actually network together, and she was the life coach in our group, and I was doing mediation still at the time. And we both kind of did this ships passing in the night. Yeah,
Pass the time.
where she kind of got into more of this end of life doula work, and I was feeling called to help people with broader aspects of their lives, not just their legal issues. So I guess what drew you to the end of life doula work?
Mm. Well, it's interesting. I feel like it's been a lifetime that has come to me in a you know, in a apex moment. You know, I had a lot of losses young. You know, my brother died when he was 13 in a house fire, and I was 18 at the time. And then right after the house burnt down, my parents got divorced, and my grandfather passed away. So I had a series of all of these losses. And at the time, I just stuffed it all in and I just kept on going, became a workaholic, became a studentaholic. I was forever in school and just trying not to feel any of that pain. And years later, I went through a whole nother series of people passing in my life, my best friend, my dad, and then the most recent one, which was a catalyst to my becoming an end-of-life doula, was with my niece, who at the age of 32 died of Crohn's disease. And she was in New Hampshire. I was living in California, and I got the call that her colon had erupted and that she was in ICU, touch and go on life support. So I flew out red eye and sat next to her.
I
And
remember actually.
you do, yeah, I was in
Yeah.
BNI at that time. And I remember just sitting bedside with her and just seeing her slowly leaving her body. And I had this most unusual sensation. It wasn't that of fear or sadness. Well, of course there was sadness, but it was this I don't know if it was curiosity or just intrigue in how a person is really letting go of their physicality and seeing her systems shut down, her kidney, her liver, and then eventually her heart. And then just seeing the essence of her kind of lift up over her body, completely discarding the physical. And I had this wave of, oh my goodness, this is so beautiful. Like, it was such beauty in the release, in the knowing that she's releasing this body and that she's free from the pain.
Mhm.
And knowing too that she didn't really die. So when we talk
Yeah.
about death, it's not death as in that's it. And it depends on how you think about death. Like, some people feel that that's it, you're done, there's no coming back, and you know, that's it. Like, dead as a doorknob, they used to say.
Yeah.
No, for me, it's a little different. I feel like that's the next phase of
It's the
who.
beginning of the next phase, perhaps.
Yeah. I think
Yeah.
the spiritual part of us is much greater, obviously, than our physical part of us. And as we shed the physical part of us, that spiritual part of us just goes, whoo, it becomes huge. And we
Mhm.
sit there in the realm of spirit, this universal divine energy, as we look through our past experiences, our past lives, with an understanding that as we come back in, if that is what is to be chosen, that we come back in with a new lesson, with a new understanding of why we're going to manifest into this bodies for another reason. And so
Yeah.
that's my belief. And I think that's what brings me peace and brings me a sense of just a knowing. And my job is not to convince anybody of what I believe or what I think. And I think every person has their own way of thinking about these things, depending on how they were brought up. We are a
Yeah.
product of our upbringing on some levels.
Hmm.
And then on other levels, we get to choose how we want to be on this planet. So you can only blame your parents for so long. And then
Yeah. Exactly.
you start to think and feel the way you really truly feel,
Hmm.
especially from a spiritual perspective. So, long
Yeah.
answer to your quick question, how did I get involved with this? Was really through a series of these deaths. And then finally,
Being around death,
yeah. And
frankly.
when it happened, I thought, oh gosh, like, this is really a weird feeling. What am I, like some kind of death angel or something? Like, this doesn't feel right. Like, and yet it felt right. It's like,
Yeah.
just feels it feels unusual. And so I was sharing with some friends, believe it or not, the following weekend, flew back to California, went to a women's entrepreneur weekend in downtown LA. And I was telling them about this, and they were like, oh, that's an end of life doula. And I was like, oh,
Yeah.
what is that? So I went back, and of course, you Google it, and as soon as you Google it, a plethora of options come up for schooling.
You
And
fell down a rabbit hole and ended up an end of life doula.
yeah, exactly. But I found a really good school in New York where it was online and you could also do things in person. It was required that you became a volunteer of hospice, which was one of my main reasons for joining their school. And in that process, it was intense and it was wildly benefit for me. I mean, it was such
Mhm.
a blessing and a gift to have experienced that and then take that learning and put it into my own business. So
Yeah, it's interesting what you say about the process of being around death and then, you know, your belief system. Well, you have a degree in spiritual psychology. So did that was that the start of you kind of on that belief system, or was it kind of more as you dove into this field that you kind of shifted your view, or your view became expanded, if you will? Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, I think growing up, I always felt like there was more to us than these physical bodies. I did have some earlier experiences in my life sitting by a lake, and there was this a wooden cross that somebody had made,
Mhm.
and I stared at it, and all of a sudden it started to glow and had these like sparkles coming from it.
Wow.
And I've had the sense of that was energy, like that was energy that was in the air. Like we're all made up of this energy. And it was
Mhm.
this feeling like, oh, well, that's kind of fun. Like, so there is more. And so I started to learn about spirituality younger. And I think going to USM, the University of Santa Monica, where I got my degree, kind of helped me put a language to it, give me some, some tags, if you will, some labels to what it was I was already experiencing. And then, of course, the school itself was amazing. They just taught me how to really shed those layers of, they say the onion, when you peel the layers of the onion. I don't say the onion. I say peel the layers of the artichoke, because when you get to the center, which is the heart and the most juiciest part of who we are, then that's the real me. That's the real us.
Right. Well, I love to always ask people that question, like, what kind of led you down this path? Because, I was not, I wasn't really necessarily raised with religion. I had a weird, strange mixing of, my father's side was Jewish. And so my paternal grandmother would have preferred we were raised Jewish, but my mom wasn't down with that. And so it resulted in no religious upbringing or anything like that. And so I never really super thought about it.
Mm,
I didn't think that life was meaningless or anything like that, but I was just like, well, it might just be this life and that's it. So I'll just give it meaning for me because I don't really hold a belief system like some people are raised with. And then at some point, somewhere in conversation, someone actually, it actually came up as a conversation surrounding hypnotherapy. I was not raised to think that hypnotherapy, but I believe that there were altered states of consciousness and that you could perhaps get somebody to think about something differently in that altered state of consciousness. I was unaware for a very long time about past life regressions and things like that. And so actually it was my therapist recommended, she's like, if you're interested in learning about this topic, why don't you read this book? It's called Many Lives, Many Masters.
oh,
Great book, right?
book. Yeah.
What is his name? Brian something.
Weiss, I think.
Yes, that's it.
Brian Weiss.
I
Yeah.
was like, it's Brian something.
Right.
Brian Weiss. Amazing book. And if you are interested in learning about, you know, the conversation of what a past life looks like or what multiple lives really looks like,
Mm.
I think it's the best introductory book because here is a man, the book is about like a Harvard trained psychiatrist who he did hypnotherapy with his clients, but he usually did regressions, which are like regressing back to a point in the present life where, you're exploring perhaps a childhood trauma, whatever the person is having trouble or kind of stuck with, you bring them to an altered state of consciousness, bring them back to that moment and heal the inner child or whatever the mission is once you kind of get there. Essentially, I'm not giving much away from the story. It's still worth a read to say that essentially this psychiatrist was working with a woman who had really terrible anxiety and depression and had been to every psychiatrist around town. Nobody could really help this woman. And so he's like, let's try like a regression. And so, he's trying to explore like, was there a trauma in this life that has been unexplored in this woman? And one thing led to another. And essentially by accident, this woman slipped into a past life.
That's
And it took him a while to realize like the way she was describing her surroundings and all of these things. He's like, she's like
what's
not
going
in the
on.
present day. What is going on? And one thing led to another. This guy turned from, a skeptic who continued with it because it seemed to be helping his client. He was just like, well, my interest is in helping her and this is helping her, whatever it is, to kind of having oh my, oh, oh my God, this is real. I can't come up to any other conclusion other than I don't know how to explain this exactly, but it's real. information was coming through to him about his life that nobody else knew, things that you just couldn't possibly explain, that this woman could not possibly know. So it was interesting for me to read that book because I'm like, oh, this is how you show somebody who has a very meticulous background where, the unexplained is not something that they venture into or accept. If there's not a study with information and a concrete conclusion, that
Mhm.
they couldn't, get past that belief. But all the things that happened to this guy in treating this woman led him to believe that, oh my gosh, like there must be more than this, because I can't come up with an explanation for all of this stuff that has happened. So if you've never read that book, highly recommend it. I don't know if you have any similar recommendations on that front, but
Well, it reminds me of William Peters at Heaven's Door, where it's more of a like that paranormal thing where this person, you've heard of near death experiences, right? This is going off the
yes,
topic a little bit, but it'll come back. Near death experiences where a person actually has a situation where they die and then they come back. And
yes.
a lot of the medical community says that that's not really a spiritual event. It's more of a medical event because that person has lack of oxygen and there's a chemical release that happens in the brain. Well, there's this gentleman, William Peters, who had experienced a passing of a loved one, and he was bedside with this person, and that person's starting to release their body, and William, being bedside, was all of a sudden transported out of his body, and the two of them were up in space in the room together at the same time and looking at each other. And then his loved one slowly started to descend forward, upward toward this light, as we hear so often about.
And that trip wasn't meant for him. It was just meant for the
It
other
was meant
ones.
for his loved one. So he
Mhm.
traveled with his loved one up to the other side of the veil where his loved one saw his parents. They saw his favorite dog. They saw the neighbor who had passed a year ago was there. And then his loved one crosses over the veil, and then William comes right back into his situation and goes, "What was that? Like,
What just happened to
what
me?
just happened?" And what I love about that is that it debunks the medical perspective on, he wasn't dying. He wasn't lack of oxygen. He didn't have any, crazy things happening in his brain as far as
He
acid.
wasn't on drugs. There was no explanation for the very visual and very
So
real feeling experience that he had. Yeah.
exactly. So what I love about it is that it just shows that we are more than just these physical bodies. There is more. There is an afterlife. There is stuff that we had many lives. I mean, we've been around for many times. Each time we come, we have a different reason for being here, a different purpose, a different lesson. And
Mhm.
so I just love this conversation where it brings some peace of mind to those that are dying, knowing that this isn't the actual end. It's
Mhm.
the end of this body, and the people who are left behind will grieve that body. They'll want to hug it and be with it, but that person's essence doesn't die. The spirit of that
Right.
person doesn't die, and
Right.
that spirit continues on. It becomes part of this energy that we can call upon any living day, any moment. We can just go breathe in our loved one's energy, and that person will be right there front and center with you. It just takes
Yeah.
a moment of slowing down the mind, focusing on your breath, and bringing forth the energy of that loved one,
Mhm.
which is what I try to teach most of the people that I work with.
It's interesting that, you know, what's interesting to me about that phenomena is, what is it that, is it your physical proximity to the person who's dying that somehow the energy around them you get swept up in? Or
Yeah.
that's the part that interests me, because I actually don't know if I've read through like I've read a ton of books on hypnotic regressions and things like that, like basically that are a compilation of someone's recordings of their sessions with clients and what information came through and things like that. And I don't know if I've read one that talks about that phenomena and what that really is.
I
Um,
don't think it has anything to do with the proximity of your physical contact. I mean, the book by Anita Morjani called Dying to Be Me is
mhm,
a great example of she saw herself up. she's passed and she saw herself up into the space of energy in the room. And then she saw her husband talking to the doctor down the hallway.
Yeah.
And this book by William Peters, At Heaven's Door, doctors have witnessed traveling with their patient, that they weren't even in the same room for. So people who wrote into William Peters, myself being one of them, was like, how do you get to do that? How do you get to be that person that travels with your loved one?
I don't think that's part of the plan. It just happens when it happens. And if you're there
Well,
for it, there you go.
there is a little bit of a formula, only in that you have to be
Interesting.
open-minded and you have to have,
Certainly, I think that has
yeah,
something to do with people's
if
experiences.
he noticed, found a common denominator of those who have a meditation practice, who
Mhm.
can be in a space that's pure and knowing, that is void of thought and void of expectation, where you actually are there. And so, I had this like strange fantasy. My mom just went through open heart surgery, and I thought, okay, if she's gonna go, I want to travel. I want to travel with her and,
Yeah, like I want to,
talk about it. But
yeah,
luckily, we didn't have to do that because she's still with us.
it's not
Very
her time
nostalgic,
yet.
very
Bless her heart. Yeah. Um, but what a gift to do what you do. And, your mom's getting a little older, obviously, and she's had, her health stuff lately. So, you know, it's a beautiful place to be in when you can learn to look at death differently
Mm.
because, look, your love for that grief is very much about, your love for that person just has like nowhere to go because they're not here in the physical with you to receive it anymore. And so that's, it's hard to deal with that aspect of it. But I think there's a lot of peace in, you know, in being open at least
Yeah.
to the idea that, you know, maybe they're not really gone. Maybe they're just not quite right here in this physical
Well, I
plane.
mean, it's the craving for that physical that when I work with my grief clients, that they just, I'm working with one woman who lost her husband, sudden heart attack.
Mhm.
And her thing that she misses the most is when they went to bed at night, he would put his arm around her and they would sleep side by side. And that's like, you can't get that back,
No.
but you can go to a place where asking him to come forward to spend that energy with her. Like
Mhm.
people think that, her husband passed away a couple of years ago, and she's like, why aren't I over this already? Like, I feel like I should be done. And there's this misnomer that grief just kind of gets smaller and smaller and goes away. I have a little diaphragm here, right here. You can
Yep.
see that?
Yeah, I can see it great.
Yeah. So people think it's small here, and then it just kind of gets smaller and with time. And in
Mhm.
reality, grief stays the same size, but life just becomes bigger around it.
You grow
So
around it. Yeah.
yeah, it doesn't go away. We just become bigger. And I think that helps to explain with a person who is grieving that it's okay to still be grieving. There's the societal understanding that after 3 weeks you should be back at work, you should be dating somebody after 3 months, and you should be
Oh my
remarried
gosh.
for a year. And it's really sad because people put so much pressure on themselves if they're still grieving. And part of really what I do, and this is through one of my masters, my guru mentor, David Kessler, who is a wonderful human being who's lost his son, wrote a book called Finding Meaning in the
Oh,
Person's Death. So finding meaning. And when that person is sitting in front of you and they're just like, what's wrong with me? And really, the idea is that their grief, first of all, has to be witnessed, it has to be acknowledged. It has to be okay. No matter where they are in their grief, it's okay. My dad died 3 years ago. I walked into a grocery store and they were playing his favorite song. Like a wave ran over me. I was sobbing, running to my car 3 years ago, and it's still gonna get triggered, and it's okay. Most of the days, I'm good, but people need to understand that it's perfectly fine. There is no right or wrong way to grieve. And so, first, holding space for them, acknowledging where they're coming from, and then helping them create a new norm. What is it feel like your spouse is gone. Now you have to do everything on your own. And
Mhm.
that can be really hard. Even just going to the grocery store by yourself or driving by your favorite ice cream place that you used to go to can be really triggering.
Mhm.
So, one of the things I just offer is that it's where a person is in their grief is exactly where they're supposed to be. And
Yeah.
that's what I do as part of my be with persona, where I just be with people as they do that and offer suggestions
Yeah.
too.
Have you ever experienced someone who I had this experience with my father? My stepmother passed in 2021, May of 2021.
Mhm.
So I took a emergency trip out to Massachusetts to be with my dad during that time, and you know, my brother and I were, my brothers and I were all concerned. We're like, I feel like Dad's not sitting with his grief at all. Like
Mhm.
he's just kind of doing. He's just finding projects around the house. He's doing anything to avoid feeling this, and you
Yeah.
know, and my stepmother was, she was a complex person, and she had a complex personality, and you know, it was funny. I was actually kind of touched that some of the folks that came to her funeral were actually really honest about,
Oh,
you
right.
know, how she was a colorful person, and sometimes, you know,
I love the word
um,
colorful.
yeah, she could be she could be a little bit of a difficult person, and it was hard to understand her sometimes. And but you know what? I think that that was um, them showing love for that person despite all of that. And you know, my dad's in a much better place with it now, I think. But there was a time there where um, there was a strong avoidance to feeling it and sitting with it. And I think that's probably the only thing that people sometimes do that maybe comes back to bite them a little bit, because you know that grief, it's out there, and it doesn't just go away as we
As
talked
I'm
about. So it's going to hunt you down eventually and catch up with you.
Well, and that's so true. Like the energy of grief is extremely heavy. And so you
Mhm.
have this grief that you're carrying around with that you don't talk about. You have these coping mechanism, either you're a workaholic or you clean your house too much or whatever it is.
Right.
But the energy of grief has to go somewhere. And unfortunately, if not released out of the body, it manifests in the body in the way
Mhm.
of dis-ease, ulcers and heart attacks and things like that. I mean, I don't want to say those things to scare people, but it's an actual fact that the energy
Mhm.
of grief is extremely heavy. And to release it is the best thing, is the road to healing, is to be able to release it, even if
Yep.
it's years later. And so
And on that note, I think
do
holding
that.
on to emotions like anger, resentment,
Yeah,
similarly can have not
absolutely.
so great effects on your spirit and your body, mind, body, spirit.
Well, that's
Um,
we're made up of that trilogy, mind, body, spirit.
that's right. And I tell people in coaching too, I'm like, look, if you're just going to therapy and addressing your mind, that, I mean, that's great. It's a good start, but that's not all of it. That's not all of it. Um, so, you know, it's a all encompassing endeavor, if you will.
Hmm.
What are your favorite parts of the job?
Well, my favorite parts really coincide with my worst parts, which is kind of curious. So, as an end of life doula, and I have the privilege and the honor of being in people's homes and seeing the difference of what happens when a family has not talked about death compared to a family that has talked about death.
Mhm.
So a family that has not talked about it, mom's in bed, they've got hospice, she's getting ready to release her body, and everyone is in panic mode. So now they're trying to make decisions in the 11th hour in the middle of crisis. Well, does mom want to stay in that machine? No, she told me she wanted to get off the feeding tube. Well, no, she told me she never wanted to be. So then you have this back and forth because it was never talked about. It was never
Yeah.
brought up. And to see that is so painful, only because it's preventable. And so
Right.
when I go into a home that has had that conversation, they've talked about a vigil. This person has already expressed who she wants in the room when she's getting ready to pass, what she wants to be wearing, what music she wants to be playing. She wants to have flowers. She wants to have her dog next to her. Like there's the discussion, there's a conversation
Hmm.
about that. And that to me is so critical to talk about what it is that you would like to have for yourself at end of life. And we talk about healthcare proxies and having advanced care directives, which are all
Yep.
super, super important.
Very
What it
important.
is that
Yes. As a
you,
person with a legal background, and
yes,
I've seen the dark and awful, the ugliness in
oh,
people surrounding when someone dies. I'm just like, oh my God, just so selfish sometimes. Like all I have to say about this is all of the childhood themes that were present with like the siblings when they were kids show up with a force when mom and dad are dying. The one that was always kind of the controlling one, but amongst the siblings will definitely try to shove their weight around and make
oh,
decisions for mom or dad that you know maybe against their wishes.
well, see, this is why it's so, yeah, it's just so critically important to have that conversation and to pick a healthcare proxy who is going to support your wishes.
To honor your wishes, yeah.
Oftentimes that's not your spouse because the spouse will just ditch everything at the last minute because no, they want that person around a little bit longer.
I was gonna say it's
Yeah.
the want to keep them around longer can influence
So I get a lot of questions about like, well, my spouse doesn't want to talk about end of life. Like, how do I even bring it up? And there's this organization called the Conversation Project. And what they do is they will send you a kit on actually how to start having that conversation.
oh, that's a great resource.
Oh, it's a wonderful resource. And you can tap into their, conversationproject.com and they will send you this free booklet and it's like from A to Z. Find a time where it's not charged, where it's just a nice Sunday afternoon and they give you prompts and how to bring it up. Oh, my mother's, my best friend's mother's, just passed away. And that made me start thinking, Mom, about what it is that you would like to have. Or, a lot of people don't want to talk about it because they think it's going to bring on death. But this
Hmm.
pamphlet actually tells you, actually gives you wordage, gives you a script on
Yeah.
how to have that conversation. And it's like one of the most important things that I do as far as education is just talk about it, talk about it, talk about it. And it's not going to be comfortable. It's not meant to be
Nope.
comfortable.
It's not comfortable.
It's not. And so we as humans don't want to feel uncomfortable. I mean, God forbid, as a life coach, people want to come in and have that magic thing on their forehead, like,
They
okay,
think I have a magic wand and I just wave it and they're suddenly like
yeah,
in a new business or in a new life. And no.
but they don't realize that they have to be uncomfortable. And that requires something different to happen. And so
Mhm.
with this, it's like allowing yourself to feel uncomfortable, allowing yourself to be in the unknown because people want to know, no, no. But if you just say, okay, I just don't know what's really going to happen. And then
Mhm.
letting it be okay, like not making it a judgment or making it a negative thing. So this pamphlet really allows a person to have that conversation, which is so critical.
Yeah.
Another piece of information I'd like to share real quick is, we talk about healthcare directives and getting a healthcare proxy, which are extremely important. Oftentimes people feel the healthcare directives are overwhelming or they just feel like too much of a chore. There's another organization, a nonprofit organization called Five Wishes. And this is a pamphlet that allows you to spell out what your five wishes are at end of life.
Oh
You
wow.
pick your person who you would want to speak for you. You talk about what you would want to have done with some of your arrangements in your home. And what I like about it is at the end, there's a script that says, I am going to forgive anyone who I have harmed and who has harmed me. I release any guilt of anyone who is holding any kind of guilt toward me. Like, it's a beautiful paragraph. And I just thought, oh, this
Yeah.
is great. And then you sign it and you get it notarized or you have two people witness it. And that becomes your healthcare directive. You can use that. It's actual
Oh
legal.
wow.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
Great for people who, unfortunately don't take those steps when they probably should. It's important to do, but I'm glad that you mentioned that because I did not know about that resource. That's amazing. important stuff to take care of, and something to direct you or your friend or somebody around you to if there's ever a need. I want to go back to some of the unexpected things that
Hmm.
happen when someone is, about to transition or kind of in that space, that end of life phase. What kind of things that, I mean, I've read many things about, what we might characterize as a paranormal experience, like much about what we touched on earlier about, like a shared death experience like that, or, someone seemingly maybe coming through to say goodbye to somebody in a very strange way. All of a
Mm.
sudden, somebody feels a presence next to them and something moves on the table right in front of their eye. I actually know somebody that went through that experience.
Oh,
Like
wow.
a friend of her husband's, like his best friend, died very suddenly and unexpectedly. It was like a car accident or something.
Mm.
And they were like just receiving the news. Like someone was on the phone reporting it to them, and she was sitting in the living room and somebody else was sitting next to her, and there was a table in between them, and they felt weird all of a sudden, and they saw a glass literally get moved across the table, and they both looked at each other like, you saw that, right?
That
And
was,
I could tell that she was not somebody that was like super open to things like that, so it really threw her for a loop. But yeah, just if you could share just like some of the things that tend to come up for either the person dying or the people around them when that time has come,
yeah.
because they can be unexpected, and I think that they can probably scare people if they don't know what they might be looking at.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I had a call from a friend whose friend was passing of cancer and at the end stages of cancer, and she needed to talk to an end of life doula immediately. So I went, and this was over at UCLA. And when I got there, she said, "Don't you see them?" And I said, "Are you seeing entities in the room?" And she says, "Yes, do you see them?" I said, "I personally don't see them, but I believe that you do." And I
Yeah.
said, "Do you know who they are?" And she says, "Well, I know of them. Like there've been people in my life, but not anybody that's like my ex-boyfriend or anything fun like that.
Mhm.
Like it's just my neighbor who's sitting there with his bathing suit on right now in the room." And I was like, "Okay." Well,
Okay.
like, let's just get curious about it. Like, what does it mean to you to see your neighbor in the bathing suit? She's like, I have no fucking idea. Like, I have no idea. That's why I feel like I'm losing my mind. I said, you're not. You're not
Yeah.
losing your mind. I think as you start to transition of releasing the physical, that spiritual part of you gets bigger and bigger. So you start to see and understand more of the things in realms that we can't see or understand in the physical body. There was another woman who I saw who was like, she became my grandmother, which you're not supposed to happen when you're working working with people who are dying. But she was such a sweet woman, and she was pretty cognizant and with it, pretty much right up until the end, until the last day I saw her when she was alive, and she said, "I see Inky, I see Inky," and I'm like, "Okay, who's Inky?" She's, "My cat. He's right here. He's sitting on my lap." I'm like, "Wow." I said, "Can I pet him?" And so I actually was like petting this cat that was sitting on her lap. And she was
Yeah.
so thrilled to have the cat. And I said,
Yeah.
"The cat's here to help you transition. The cat's helping."
Yeah.
And she's like, "Oh, I knew I loved this cat." And it kind of brought her to a space of letting go. Like, if it's
Mhm.
okay to let go. She's
Like,
not
oh, my
alone.
cat that died is here, so must mean that I must exist after whatever this is too.
Yes, a lot of people feel like they're gonna be alone when they die, and it's
Hmm.
my belief is that you're not. You're not. There is a people that love you that are there waiting for you. My grandmother, who was in the hospital after having a heart attack, she passed, came back, and she saw my grandfather. This is my mom retelling the story to me. And she
Hmm.
says, "Why did you bring me back? I want to go back and be with Randolph. I want to be back with my husband." And she said it was so peaceful and so calm. And that is what I think about when I think of end of life, is that how can we bring that peace and calm now in our life so that we can extend it when we are at of life. So do we have peace and calm in our lives right now while we're
Yeah.
alive and healthy? Like,
Yeah.
that's the $1,000 question. Do you have it? And if you don't, why not? If you don't, then you need to see Ashley. Get your shit together before
Get
you
your shit together. That's right.
I don't know if we're allowed to swear on this thing, but it's like, to really truly
We do what we want on this
okay.
show, okay?
Yeah. Truly understand that how we live is how we die. If you
Yeah,
live your life in negative and see the worst in everything and see that life is against you, then as you get at end of life, it's going to feel even worse that life is against you. What did I do wrong? God's punishing me. And if you live a life of just being in the moment, being in the now, understanding that these things that happen to us, they're just experiences. They're not
hmm,
who we really are. They just shape us to help us become better versions of ourselves. But something that happened a couple of years ago that I hated happening is not really who I am. I can let go of that experience. It doesn't
yeah,
define me. And so as I continue to lean in toward what feels good, lean in toward the love for myself, and then the love for myself can become that overflow to the love of people in my life,
right.
then we can start living life large and we can
It
die in
definitely
a
it
place.
starts at home, as I say.
It starts with an inside out job.
Yeah,
Absolutely. I work from that space, even at end of life. We're talking about inside out. How are you inside so that it can bring forth the external part of energy that you want to have happen in your life.
right.
But living happy now means dying happy later, most of the time.
Absolutely. And those experiences, I've read a lot of interesting things about them. And actually, there's if people are interested in learning more about like um collective experiences involving the other side or whatever you would like to call it.
Hmm.
Um, oh, what is it called? What is it called? I just pulled it up. Surviving Death is it's on Netflix. It's a multi-part series, and actually, that talks about it's people who are still living who had near-death experiences, and
Nice. Surviving death.
yep,
Okay, cool. I'm,
and it's very interesting between like that, things like that I've watched or read or seen, and then different things I've read from like hypnotherapy regressions almost like it's like crazy how similar
mhm.
uh all these different souls describe what they call
Oh,
home or when they're in an altered state of consciousness, a space of literal unconditional love. And
mm,
and that's why many people who wake up from near death experiences are like,
feel that.
I'm back here again. you know
Right. You know, uh,
Planet Earth is a little brutal compared by comparison.
well, the book I mentioned earlier, Dying to Be Me, talks a lot about that. How when you
Say
have
that again. What is it called?
Dying to Be Me by
Dying to be me.
Anita Morjati. And
All right.
another book that helps me, and this is going to be a shameless plug, but it's a book called The Synthesis Effect, written by none other than Dr. John McGrail, who just happens
Dr.
to be
John McGrail, your
my
husband.
husband right here. I happen to have it right here. And he talks about his synthesis effect, which is how living in balance now through mind, body, spirit can help us bring permanent positive changes in our life that we are seeking. And he
Mhm.
works a lot with past life regressions. He works a lot with hypnotherapy, and he works, he's got stories in his book about that. Oh, just
We'll go into another question. So, when people experience their loved one kind of having one of these experiences in their end of life stage, um, how should they react? Certainly, questioning them and saying that's not real is probably not it.
oh,
Um, so, what do you think is a good way, gracious way to kind of deal with those things for a family member who's experiencing that, or somebody around the person who's passing?
hmm. Well, first to talk about it, and that's one thing that I do as an end of life doula. I'm there to help them talk about it. But one of the things that's really, really important, and this is true for any person who's passing and whatever that person's feeling that's passing, is to just go with it, to just,
Hmm.
don't deny the fact that the person's seeing something because we have no idea if they're seeing something or not. But the fact
Yeah.
that they are, and if it's bringing them a sense of calm and peace, then great. Like to just say, oh my gosh, Aunt Millie, that's beautiful that you're seeing Uncle Willie
Yeah.
now. I mean, that's it's a beautiful thing. Even though you might think, oh my gosh, she's really losing it. She may be losing it in some sense, but the fact that she sees this person, the times when it gets a little sketchy is if what they're seeing scares them and brings
Yeah.
them more fear than not. Like all of a sudden they're starting to scream because they see a monster coming in the room, which has happened. And so at that point, you just offer as much condolences of words that will help calm the person down. It's like, let's just take a deep breath in. Let's focus on our
Yep.
breathing. I understand you're seeing something that scares you. We can release that now. Just allowing that to be, just bring them back to the breath while they're having a visualization like that. That can be scary. It can help them calm down.
Yeah.
But if sometimes they may be delusional and they may have these scary episodes, and this is where hospice comes in and can give them some kind of medication to help them feel more relaxed, because we don't want to
Yeah.
be in a state of fright and
Certainly no one wants to leave the earth feeling that
no,
way.
no,
Yeah.
and truly, and sometimes it's out of our control. And if they're actually being scared, then we want to help them become more calm. And that's where hospice can come in a lot and just give them some slight sedation or something that will help them to release that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Um, how do you think, how do you think that some of the things that we've talked about, those themes that come up at the end of life for the person who's dying and some of the regrets, how can we kind of take those lessons and apply them to our lives moving forward for those of us who are not on our exit path right now?
Well, it's really about, for me, it's about slowing down. You know, people in our everyday lives, we're always go, 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 do, do, do. And then when you get an end of life, all of a sudden everything becomes slower. It becomes like a crawl as you start to realize that that end of life is imminent. And for me, the powerful lesson in that is to slow it down now.
Yeah.
Enjoy every moment now. Be present to what's happening now. And to be in that space is to focus in on our breathing, stay out of our mind as much as we can. Don't listen to our ego. Really be present to what feels right for us in that given moment. And if it doesn't feel right, then what can make it feel right? What are the options to make it feel right? And
Mhm.
so I think living while we are edging toward death is really the most critical thing that we can understand, is that
Mhm.
we have control how we are present on this planet, and
Yeah.
to choose to make choices that serve our health and wealth and well-being on an everyday basis
Yeah.
is very helpful.
Well, you said it, girl. Oh my goodness. Well, it has been, gosh, this has been such a good conversation, and
Has
I could certainly do this for like 4 or 5 hours straight, but I don't know if everybody has the bandwidth for that. So I think we did a pretty good job covering a lot of these topics, and
Yeah, I think
yeah,
so too. And there's definitely still a lot of avenues that we could be traveling down as far as where to go with this, and how to have a life that feels good, and all different ways to bring in our sense of purpose, which is right up along your alley too, Ashley.
yep,
But
absolutely.
it's been a true honor to be here with you, and I always find you easy to talk with anyway. And it's just great to see your cute face. And now that I have you back on the screen again, and, yeah, I just wish you luck with this podcast going forward. I hope you get lots more guests and you become famous and well known. Oh, one podcast I did want to talk about real quick is
Yeah.
with Anderson Cooper. He has a podcast
Oh,
that talks about dying. And
oh, interesting. Anderson Cooper.
Anderson Cooper, yes, of all people. And I should have
Okay.
down
I
that,
knew he had a podcast. I knew he, took a number of different types of guests, but I did not know that there was like a focus on that.
yes, it's a focus on that. And he has people who come in that have experienced issues around death and dying. And just Google Anderson Cooper podcast, because the name of it is really escaping me. But it's wonderful. It's fun to listen to, and he has some really fun guests. And I visualize you doing the same thing with your career in podcasting.
Yeah. Well, look, I thought what better way to help people be thinking about the kind of life they want to live than considering, what the end game is for all of us and what that really looks like, and some of the things that come up for those people, and how we can, be more mindful about the way we're going on about our lives as a result.
Amen.
So thank you so much for being my first official guest on this podcast. And
You're very welcome.
so appreciated. And I hope everybody got something out of it. So happy Friday, everyone. Many blessings. So there you have it. It was my first podcast with a guest. Super pleased with how it came out. And I'm really excited to bring more guests in the future who have interesting and inspiring stories and professions that might help you think about different ways you want to change things in your life. In true beginner fashion, I accidentally cut off my guest a little bit there at the end when we had a tech issue. And she was actually talking about the synthesis effect, which is John McGrail's book. He's actually a pretty well-known hypnotherapist. So please check that out. I also linked all of the other books we talked about in this podcast down below. So check them out, and I'll see you at the next level.